I'm Aria Reynolds, 27 years old, and last Friday, my phone buzzed with a text that felt like a punch to the gut. Aria, we think it's best you skip Christmas dinner this year. Ethan says he's uncomfortable around you. My chest tightened. I stared at the glow of the screen in my tiny Seattle apartment and felt the floor drop out from under me. I work as a brand strategist for a boutique agency downtown. My days are full of brainstorming sessions, coffee runs, and late-night pitch decks. I've built a life I love, bright loft neighbors, who've become friends weekends on the ferry. Yet in that instant, everything I'd earned felt meaningless. I reread the message. My mother Maria had sent it. No apology, no hint of regret, just an order. Ethan feels uncomfortable. Always him. Always his feelings first. I closed my eyes and saw my face, as it must have looked stunned, hurt, confused. A week before, I'd flown home for my brother's engagement party. I'd spent 3 days helping with flowers, menu tastings, and seating charts, every detail tailored to make Ethan shine. I'd listened to my mother fret over appearances, taken calls from my father, Jonathan, about last-minute seating changes. And when the party began, I'd mingled, laughed, and even offered marketing tips to my soon-to-be sister-in-law's father. I thought it was going well. Then Ethan lost it. He accused me of showing off, claimed I'd turned the spotlight on myself in front of his fiancé's wealthy family. He had screamed right there in the backyard in front of guests. My mother had hushed him. My father had sighed. And somehow, I became the villain. I hadn't defended myself. I slunk away, tears stinging my eyes, convinced I was in the wrong. I told myself I'd done something wrong, something terrible. But standing in the cold driveway that night, my heart broken, I realized I didn't know what I had done. Weeks passed. I tried to reconnect. I sent Ethan articles about his favorite video games. I called home for holiday plans. I checked in on Mom's garden project. Every message I sent was met with silence. And then came the text, "Do not come." I sank onto my couch. The city lights blurred through my window. I felt small, lost, erased. My phone locked and lay face down beside me. I let my mind drift back through years of small disappointments. As kids, Ethan had always been the star. 3 years younger, he was the sensitive one. My tears, my tantrums were met with eye rolls. His meltdowns, genuine or not, brought the house to a standstill. His comfort was sacred. Mine was negotiable. When I was 10, my birthday cake was scrapped because Ethan caught a cold. At 16, my big dance was cut short when he hated the music. At college graduation, my parents left early because he'd been teased about future plans. Every achievement I celebrated was overshadowed by his fragility. I became the invisible daughter by choice. Straight-A student council president, charity volunteer. I piled these on until I could barely breathe. My parents nodded distracted, then rushed off to soothe Ethan when he had a bad day. I learned to be proud in silence. College at the University of Washington gave me a taste of freedom. My roommate Zoe saw me as Aria, not Ethan's sister. She said I lit up when I spoke about strategic brand narratives. She was right. For the first time, I felt alive outside the family orbit. After graduation, I moved to Seattle instead of Spokane. My parents begged me to stay close. Family matters, they said. But I chose myself. I built friendships that celebrated my wins. I found a mentor who valued my ideas. I carved out my own life. I still called weekly. I sent care packages. I flew home for my parents' anniversary. I tried to bridge the gap with Ethan asked about his graphic design classes, his gaming side projects. Sometimes he replied. Mostly he didn't. When I mentioned a work award, he stormed off dinner. Mom said, "You know how sensitive he is." Dad said, "Just let him have some space." My space, my time, my feelings. They didn't matter. Now I understood clearly they never did. I rubbed my temples and forced myself to breathe. I refused to numb out in despair. I unlocked my phone and opened a blank note. I typed, "I see. Thanks for letting me know." Short, simple, no begging, no guilt trip. The only thing left to do was decide what came next. My heart pounded with a mixture of sorrow and strange relief. I set the note aside and stared at the ceiling. This exclusion cut deeper than anything before. But it also shone a light on everything I'd endured. I whispered to the quiet room I deserve better, Tomorrow, I would call my friend Marcus. He always had my back. I would book time with my therapist. I would remind myself that my worth isn't tied to Ethan's comfort. Tonight, I would let myself feel angry, let the tears come. Then I would plan how to stand up for myself, because something inside me had shifted. I was tired of making myself small. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to go home at all. The next morning, I woke to the gray Seattle sky pressed against my window, and the ache in my chest felt heavier than any hangover. So I lay there for a long moment, letting the weight of that text from Mom settle into my bones before I reached for my phone and dialed Marcus's number on tremulous fingers. When he answered with his usual warm, "Hey, superstar," I forced a wry laugh and whispered, "I'm not feeling very starry," and within 20 minutes, he was at my door with a latte from that little roastery I love, and the instant he saw my face, he wordlessly handed me the coffee and wrapped me in a hug so fierce I almost melted into relief. And as we sank onto my couch, he listened while I recounted the engagement party explosion. The way Ethan had turned on me, the hush that fell over the guests, and the text that disinvited me, every detail unlocking a fresh wave of tears until I was sobbing into my hands. When I finally ran out of tears, he set his coffee beside mine and said, "Aria, you're not the problem here," and those words echoed through me like a beacon. I realized I'd spent years believing I was to blame for keeping peace, that my achievements were too bright, my needs too loud, and in that moment, with Marcus's steady gaze, I felt a crack open in the shell I'd built around my own hurt. Late that afternoon, I messaged my therapist, Dr. Lin, explaining I needed an emergency session, and she fit me in at 5, so I hurried downtown through a drizzle that matched my mood and parked outside her office, where the soft glow of her lamps always felt like sanctuary. Inside, I talked through everything again. The childhood birthdays canceled for Ethan's tantrums. Graduation parties cut short when he felt overshadowed. Each memory, a thread in the tapestry of my self-doubt. And as Dr. Lin nodded and guided me through exercises to name and locate my emotions in my body, I felt the familiar sinews of guilt begin to loosen. After therapy, I took a long walk along the waterfront feet, crunching on the pebble path, and for the first time, I didn't rush back to my apartment to disappear into work. I let the wind whip my hair, the cold pinch my cheeks, savoring the sting that reminded me I was alive. When I returned home, I set to work on something both terrifying and exhilarating, drafting an invitation for a Friendsgiving at my place. I opened a group chat with Zoe Marcus, my neighbor Lena, and a few others I'd met at volunteer events. And with trembling enthusiasm, I wrote, "I'm hosting Thanksgiving dinner, no turkey trauma permitted, just good food and chosen family." The responses flooded in, "Count me in" from Zoe. "I'll bring pie from Lena Games" from Marcus. Each message was a small victory proof that I mattered to people who saw me fully. For days, I floated between bursts of excitement and plunges of doubt. What if I couldn't pull it together? What if I was overreacting? But every time I heard a ping announcing a friend's encouragement, I pushed the doubts aside and worked on my menu curating recipes that felt like home caramelized Brussels sprouts, succulent roast turkey, sweet potato gratin, pumpkin cheesecake with a ginger snap crust. As I shopped at the farmer's market, runners paused to wish me luck or offer recipe tips, and by Friday, my apartment smelled like roasting herbs and autumn spice. In the evenings, I rehearsed setting boundaries by writing and rewriting the message I planned to send to my parents if they texted, polishing each sentence until it struck the tone between firm and loving, because I realized for the first time that I could advocate for myself without ambush or apology. Meanwhile, my parents' texts arrived in a steady drip of insinuations and guilt trips. "We're disappointed. Family is everything. Ethan is under a lot of stress." I read them once, then muted the thread, refusing to let their dismissals douse the warmth growing in me. On Thanksgiving morning, I woke early, the scent of sage and butter lifting me from sleep, and draped my dining table with autumnal linens and handwritten place cards. When my friends began to arrive, Zoe with her crisp green bean casserole, Marcus with a homemade cranberry relish, Lena holding a bottle of sparkling cider, I felt a rush of joy so pure it nearly made me weep. We laughed as we carved the bird past sides toasted to friendship and resilience, and I realized that this gathering was more meaningful than any invitation I'd ever received from blood relatives. After dinner, as we curled up with coffee and pumpkin pie, Marcus raised his slice and said, "To you, Arya, never doubt the space you occupy." I blinked back tears and nodded, tasting the sweetness of acceptance. Later, in the quiet aftermath, I sat on my couch with leftovers and Tupperware and reflected on how differently my heart felt now, lighter, guarded, but open, willing to trust that my worth wasn't defined by the fragile comfort of others. Before I knew it, evening had fallen, and I had a final text from Zoe Best, Thanksgiving ever. "Love you, friend." I stared at those words and felt a fierce pride swell in me. The day had begun with a message of exclusion and ended with a celebration of inclusion of my own making. Later, when I finally checked my phone and saw a long voicemail from Dad sounding uncertain, "We miss you. Maybe we could talk." I paused, thumb hovering over the play button, and realized I didn't have to decide yet. I had found my anchor in people who valued me unconditionally. And for the first time, I knew I could choose to protect the sanctuary I'd built before reopening the door to old wounds. And as I drifted to sleep that night, the echo of laughter from my friends' voices remained in my chest, a promise that home can be where love is freely given, not where you're required to shrink. The next morning, I woke to the soft gray of Seattle rain tapping my window, and the lingering warmth of last night's laughter in my bones. But that glow quickly gave way to quiet loneliness as I remembered the text from my mother and the empty space at our family table. I lay still under my duvet for longer than usual, resisting the urge to reach for my phone until finally I peeled back the covers, planted my feet on the carpet, and walked into the kitchen to brew coffee, the rich aroma filling the air as I stared out at the drizzly skyline and let my thoughts settle. Yesterday, I had gathered chosen family around my table friends who offered solace instead of judgment. And tonight, I would return to solitude, but I refused to let old patterns reclaim me. I opened my laptop and drafted a message to my parents, fingers hesitating over the keys. "Mom and Dad, I appreciate that you're trying to protect Ethan, but I won't accept being excluded because he feels uncomfortable. I love you both. And in future, I expect to be treated with the same basic consideration." I saved it as a draft and pushed it aside, reminding myself that boundaries aren't signed in haste. I scrolled through my calendar and saw an open slot for therapy with Dr. Lin next Wednesday. Until then, I decided to lean on my support network. I brewed a second cup and called Zoe, who answered on the first ring with a cheerful sunshine and immediately invited me for a mid-morning walk in Gasworks Park, promising that fresh air would clear my head. When I arrived, she was waiting under an umbrella raincoat zipped tight, and we walked along the shore as she listened while I spoke in halting sentences about my parents' guilt trips, Ethan's tantrums, the hollow ache of exclusion, and each time tears pricked my eyes, she squeezed my shoulder and reminded me that my feelings mattered. After our walk, I returned home determined to tackle my freelance project. So I set up my laptop at the dining table, once a battleground for forced smiles and hushed disputes, now the command center for my future, and lost myself in designing a new brand identity for a local nonprofit. The steady work soothing the raw nerve of my emotions. At lunchtime, I received a text from Lena, my neighbor and fellow volunteer at the animal shelter, asking if I wanted to join her for soup downtown. Over steaming bowls, we talked about everything but family, our mutual love of stray cats, upcoming charity events, plans to run a 5K in June, until I realized how restorative it felt to focus on shared passions instead of painful past. By mid-afternoon, I had fleshed out several versions of my message to Mom and Dad, each more polished than the last. I consulted Marcus via voice note, and he advised me to use clear, calm language. No snark, no blame, just honest assertion of my needs. And I rewrote the draft again, cutting excess words until every sentence carried purpose. When I paused to stretch, I noticed a voicemail icon blinking on my phone. My father's name hovered in cursive letters, and my heart thumped with anticipation and dread. I tapped play and listened to his uncertain voice. "Arya, it's Dad. I heard about your Thanksgiving plans. I know things got tense with Ethan's party and all, and I'm sorry if you felt hurt. Can we talk? Call me when you're ready." His apology was halting, almost inaudible, under the Seattle drizzle beating on my window. But it carried a weight I hadn't felt in years, the tiny crack of remorse in a wall that had long seemed impenetrable. I closed my eyes and let his words echo in the quiet apartment, wondering what would happen if I answered his call. Knowing that whatever choice I made next would reshape the fragile boundaries I was only just learning to draw. And somewhere deep inside, I felt the faint stirrings of hope that maybe this time, my family might finally see me. That voicemail from my father hovered in the quiet of my living room, a hesitant olive branch amid the storm of hurt I'd felt all season, and I found myself pacing between the kitchen and the couch, coffee growing cold as I weighed my next move. My fingers hovered over the call button long enough for the rain outside to soften into a whisper against the window panes, reminding me of childhood mornings in our backyard, when I'd watch droplets race down tulip petals, believing then that water could wash away any trouble if only I could summon that same faith now. Finally, I pressed dial and heard my father's relief crackle through the line, his voice cautious as he asked if I was okay. And when I paused, voice thick with unspoken history, he offered a shaky apology for Thanksgiving, admitting that he hadn't understood how deeply I was wounded by being uninvited, and that he missed the warmth of having me home. I listened chest tight as he spoke of family expectations and the pressure he'd felt to shield Ethan's insecurities, and I realized he was trapped between loyalty to his son and the daughter he'd helped raise, both of us innocent victims of a dynamic he hadn't questioned until now. I took a steadying breath and told him plainly that I appreciated his concern, but needed more than remorse. I needed a commitment to change our family's pattern of exclusion, and I needed him to acknowledge that favoring Ethan's comfort at the expense of my belonging was an unfair imbalance that had shadowed our home for too long. His reply was earnest. He admitted he'd behaved cowardly, choosing ease over equity, and he agreed to talk with my mother about how to repair the fissure that had grown so wide between us. He suggested family therapy after the holidays, an idea he'd hesitated to propose before, but now embraced when I made clear I could not return home to the same old rules that dictated my worth by my willingness to shrink. As he spoke, I felt my resolve harden and my heart ease a little. I would not accept piecemeal apologies or hollow gestures, but if they committed to genuine work guided by a therapist who could help us all see our blind spots, I was willing to open the door to dialogue. I closed our conversation by asking him to share the therapist's details once he'd spoken to Mom, and we ended the call with an uneasy hope that felt entirely new. With my phone still in hand, I sank onto the couch and let the tension leak away, imagining a future where family gatherings were spaces of mutual respect rather than minefields of emotion. Before dawn, light faded completely, I drafted the email I'd rehearsed for days, refining each sentence so that it carried honesty without accusation. Mom and Dad, I know you both love me, and I need to believe that our family can grow beyond the hurt of this season. I felt deeply wounded by being excluded from Thanksgiving because of Ethan's discomfort, and I won't accept that as a solution to his insecurities. I'm committed to finding a way for all of us to feel safe and valued in each other's presence, and I welcome the opportunity for family therapy after the holidays to learn healthier patterns of support. I miss you, and I hope we can rebuild our connection with mutual respect. I paused before sending heart fluttering like a hummingbird's wings, then clicked send and watched the delivered notification glow on my screen. In that moment, the apartment felt both larger and quieter, as if space had opened up around me for fresh air to flow in. I tucked my phone into my pocket and stepped onto the balcony, inhaling the damp, distant scent of cedar and rain, letting the cold air cut through the residue of anxiety. Images of my mother's wincing smile, Ethan's tense posture at the party, and my own tremulous absence at the family table drifted through my mind, but they no longer held me captive. Instead, I acknowledged the pain they carried and allowed myself to sense the possibility of change. After a long exhale, I returned inside and wrote in my journal by lamplight, tracing the arc of my courage from the moment I refused to apologize for being myself to the clarity of setting firm boundaries, each word affirming that love need not demand erasure of one's truth. The next morning, I woke to a text from my mother. "We got your email. We need time to process." And instead of the familiar stab of guilt, I felt a steady calm. I replied, "Understood," I'm here when you're ready. Then silenced my phone and laced up my running shoes. As I jogged through Discovery Park, the forest trail cushioned my steps, and sunlight filtered through towering pines, painting the path ahead with patches of gold. I reminded myself that healing like the tide comes in cycles ebbing and flowing, sometimes receding, before surging anew, and that I had finally placed my own needs on the map of our family's journey. Later that afternoon, I received another voicemail, this time from my brother Arya. Can we talk? I realize I hurt you and I want to make it right. My chest tightened at the vulnerability in his voice, but I let the message play through. As I stood in my doorway, raincoat still damp, I felt the stir of genuine possibility mingled with caution, and I whispered into the rainy dusk, "Yes, Ethan, we can talk." In that simple choice lay the seed of a new chapter, one in which I no longer remained silent in the shadows of my family's expectations, but spoke my truth and invited them to meet me in the light. That rainy evening, I paced my apartment with my phone pressed against my ear until my voicemail replayed Ethan's hesitant words for the third time. "Arya, can we talk? I realize I hurt you and I want to make it right." And I realized that answering his call would mark a turning point in our relationship. So the next morning, with dawn's gray light filtering through the blinds, I dialed his number, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. When he answered, his voice was tentative, apologetic, as if each word was weighed before release. "Hey, sis. Thank you for calling." I swallowed back my own trepidation and suggested we meet for coffee at our childhood cafe on Pine Street, the one with mismatched chairs and cinnamon rolls that always smelled like home. And Ethan agreed gratefully, saying he'd pick me up in 20 minutes. As I dressed in a simple sweater and jeans, I rehearsed in my mind how I might speak truth without accusation, how I could name my pain while listening to his, knowing that this conversation could either reopen old wounds or begin the healing I'd longed for. When he arrived, his face was more angular than I remembered, his eyes shadowed by guilt and something softer regret, perhaps. And we hugged awkwardly in the rain-slick street before slipping inside the cafe where the bell over the door chimed our arrival. We found a corner table by the window. I ordered my usual chai latte. He asked for black coffee. For a moment, we sat in silence, each cradling our warm mugs, until I cleared my throat and said I wasn't sure how to start this. Ethan exhaled, his shoulders loosening slightly. "Me neither. First, I'm sorry. I was out of line at the engagement party. I should never have yelled at you in front of everyone." His apology was simple, but its sincerity rang clear. I nodded and replied, "Thank you. That meant a lot hearing you say it." He leaned forward, voice low. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. I realized I've felt jealous of you for years, how your life just worked it while I was stuck figuring mine out. And instead of talking to you, I lashed out." He looked away, guilt creasing his brow. I know that's no excuse. My heart ached to see him vulnerable. I reached across the table and placed a hand on his. "I understand feeling insecure. I wish you'd told me, though, instead of blaming me." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I was ashamed. I thought if I admitted my jealousy, I'd be confessing that you were better than me." My own memories flickered. Science fair ribbons, smashed debates cut short, each an example of how I'd learned to hide disappointment's sting. I squeezed his hand gently and said, "You're not worse than me. We each have our strengths, but I can't keep being the punching bag for your insecurities." He looked pained but resolute. "I know, and I'm sorry for treating you like you had to accommodate me. You deserve respect." Relief and sadness mingled in my chest. I took a slow sip of chai and said, "I want us to move forward, Ethan. But I also need you to understand my feelings matter too." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded letter, placing it on the table between us. My breath caught as I recognized my own handwriting on the envelope. "I wrote this for you," he said quietly, but I didn't have the courage to hand it over until I apologized first. With trembling fingers, I opened it and read his words, an earnest chronicle of his childhood, fear of not being enough, his admiration for my drive, his regret at how he'd taken it out on me. In that letter, I heard a brother who saw me at last. I met his gaze and whispered, "Thank you." Tears blurred my vision as he explained that he'd reached out to Dr. Lynn hoping she could guide us through our shared history, and he asked if I'd join him in a few sibling therapy sessions before involving Mom and Dad. I felt a surge of cautious hope. This was more than I dared dream. I agreed, and we set a time for next Tuesday at her office. We sat for a long moment in companionable silence, the hum of the cafe washing around us, feeling like two ships finally finding harbor. When we stood to leave, Ethan slipped an arm around my shoulders. Outside, the rain had ceased, and the air smelled of wet earth and possibility. We walked home beneath muted streetlights, our steps in sync for the first time in years. Back at my apartment, I made 2 mugs of hot chocolate, our childhood treat, and we replayed our conversation over marshmallows and laughter that felt genuine instead of forced. As we parted that evening, Ethan said, "Thank you for giving me a chance." I hugged him tight and replied, "Thank you for wanting to change." After he left, I sat at my desk and drafted a message to my parents announcing the sibling therapy plan and inviting them to join once we'd laid some groundwork, framing it as a desire to rebuild with intention rather than as reproach. I polished each sentence until it balanced sincerity and firmness, then sent it before doubt could creep in. The next morning, my phone chimed with a single-line reply from Mom. "Thank you for including us. We'll consider it." It wasn't the enthusiastic yes I'd hoped for, but it was openness, a crack in the old wall. I saved the message and laced up my sneakers for another run along Elliott Bay. Muscles warm with purpose, mind alight with cautious optimism. In that rhythm of pounding feet and breathing air, I felt the threads of our family beginning to reweave into something stronger. A tapestry not of forced harmony, but of honest connections. Each voice, my own Ethan's, my parents finally learning to be heard. That morning, I woke before my alarm, my heart thrumming with equal parts hope and nerves as I dressed in soft layers and tucked a fresh notebook into my bag. Then I set out through the crisp December air toward Dr. Lynn's office, where Ethan was already waiting, standing beneath the oak tree that shaded the narrow walkway, as if guarding our fragile new alliance. When I reached him, he offered a small, uncertain smile, and we stepped inside together, the hushed reception area, lending our reunion the weight of a ceremony. We settled into chairs angled toward each other as Dr. Lynn entered, greeting us by name and inviting us to share what brought us here. Ethan began, his voice quiet but steady, as he recounted how our childhood rivalry had morphed into a gulf of resentment, how he had grown accustomed to blaming me for his own insecurities instead of facing them, and I listened as he spoke, the echoes of old hurts surfacing in my chest. Then I spoke and turned my words, at first catching in my throat like stones. But with each breath, I found clarity. I described the years I had bent myself into shapes to avoid conflict, the birthdays and graduations where I faded into the wallpaper so he could remain comfortable, and the recent Thanksgiving text that had seared the truth of my invisibility into my heart. Lynn guided us through a series of questions that felt like keys unlocking new understanding, what each of us needed from the other, the unspoken rules that governed our home, the roles we had adopted, and how they no longer served us. And as we spoke, I felt a surprising kinship bloom between us, the kind that arises when two people finally witness each other's pain without judgment. When the session closed, Ethan and I lingered in the hallway, brushing snowflakes from our coats, as he turned to me with a softer expression than I had seen in years, and said, "I realize now I'm your brother, not your judge. I want to walk beside you, not ahead or behind." Tears warmed my cheeks as I nodded, feeling our bond strengthen in that moment. Later that afternoon, we met our parents for coffee at a neutral cafe, a tentative step toward including them in the healing. And I watched my mother's guarded posture soften when Ethan spoke first, admitting that he'd hurt me and acknowledging my right to feel pain. My father listened, brow furrowed with concern. And when it was my turn, I delivered the message I had practiced. I needed them to recognize that protecting Ethan should not require excluding me, that so long as our family defaulted to shielding his insecurities at my expense, I could not feel truly welcome, and I invited them to join sibling and then family therapy sessions to learn how to support both of us in equal measure. My mother's eyes glistened as she confessed she had never understood how deeply I suffered in silence, and my father reached out to take my hand, promising to do better. I felt a cautious warmth bloom in my chest, the first real sign that our family could be more than the sum of its old wounds. In the days that followed, Ethan and I returned to Dr. Lin for a few more sessions, sharing memories. We had never voiced aloud his fear of failure, mirrored by my fear of being unwanted, and we practiced new ways of listening and responding, learning how to say "I hear you" without immediately trying to fix or dismiss, how to set boundaries with compassion, and how to welcome feedback without collapsing into guilt. With each meeting, I noticed old patterns loosening. I no longer braced myself for criticism, and Ethan no longer reacted with anger when I spoke of my life. At home, I set aside the draft of a holiday letter and instead wrote a simple card to my mother and father, thanking them for agreeing to therapy and expressing my love, along with my hope that we could build a family that embraced each member's strengths and struggles. When I left the card on the kitchen table that weekend, the air between us felt lighter, as if the debt of unspoken grievances had begun to lift. One evening, Ethan and I cooked dinner together in my apartment, our favorite childhood recipe of roasted vegetables and pasta, laughing over memories of kitchen disasters and sharing our dreams for the coming year. And in that warmth, I realized how rare it was to feel both seen and safe in another's company. The next day, my mother surprised me with a text message, "Can we bring over dessert tonight? I'd love to catch up." I paused before replying, "Yes," heart fluttering, then set the table for 4 candles flickering in the twilight and welcomed my parents into the home I had made. Over simple brownies and hot tea, we talked openly. No tense silences, no sidestepping complaints, and I watched my mother's features relax as she asked questions about my work, instead of defaulting to admonishments, and my father offered his own stories of childhood missteps. It wasn't perfect old defensiveness, flared briefly, when Ethan and I exchanged knowing glances, but guided by the skills we'd practiced in therapy, we gently steered the conversation back to compassion, acknowledging the hurts we had caused each other, and expressing gratitude for the chance to start anew. That night, as I tidied the kitchen, I felt an unfamiliar sense of belonging bloom in the quiet spaces of my heart. I began to understand that families are not defined by permanence of roles, but by willingness to adapt and listen, and that my worth was never conditional on my capacity to make myself small. Later, alone in my bedroom, I read through my journal entries from the past months and marveled at the transformation. The Arya who once shrank at every text from home had become a woman who spoke her truth and invited others to meet her there. I closed my notebook with a soft smile, breathing in the gentle peace that had settled over our family, knowing that our journey was far from over, but for the first time feeling confident that we had the tools to navigate whatever came next together. By mid-January, the frosty air in Seattle had taken on the faint promise of spring, as I found myself once again stepping into Dr. Lin's sunlit office for a third round of family therapy, not just with Ethan by my side, but this time with Mom and Dad joining us around the low circular table. In the moments before we spoke, I felt a flutter of nerves, remembering how I used to clutch the edges of my childhood birthday cakes, afraid of spoiling everything. Yet today, I braced myself with the confidence of someone who had already reclaimed her voice, and when Dr. Lin invited us to share updates on our progress, my father cleared his throat and spoke with an earnest softness I had never heard before, saying that he'd spent evenings rereading the letter Ethan wrote me at the cafe and reflecting on how he'd minimized my pain for so long, while my mother's eyes focused on the woven rug beneath her feet. Admitted that she had learned to recognize when she slipped back into the habit of catering solely to Ethan's insecurities and was working on pausing breathing before reacting. Ethan then told us how our weekly walks in the park had become a steady lifeline, moments when he felt safe to voice his doubts about his own career path. And I shared how I'd stopped shrinking myself in conversation, refusing to downplay my successes even when old guilt whispered I should. And as each of us spoke in turn, I felt the invisible walls between us dissolve into a softer, more solid ground of understanding. And when Lin asked us to identify one practical step we could take before our next session, I suggested we establish a shared calendar for weekly check-ins, a small ritual to keep our connection alive, even when life's demands pulled us in different directions. Afterward, walking home with Ethan under the pale winter sun, we stopped at our favorite corner cafe and laughed over cinnamon-scented lattes, feeling the ease between us blossom into genuine friendship rather than the wary truce it had once been. Back at my apartment, I texted Zoe and Lena to invite them to a gathering I was planning for Valentine's Day, a casual potluck to celebrate friendship because I'd come to know that the ties of chosen family were just as vital to my well-being as the repaired bonds with my blood relatives. And when my phone buzzed with enthusiastic yeses, my heart swelled with gratitude for the community I had nurtured. A week later, I found myself at Dr. Lynn's office again, this time as siblings only. And Ethan and I walked through a trust exercise where we listed each other's strengths out loud. My perseverance, his creativity, and traded promises to support one another's goals, the simple act of naming virtues that I once felt compelled to hide, revealing how far we'd both come. Then came the day I had both dreaded and hoped for a joint session with my parents, Ethan and me, all four of us in the same room. Vulnerability shining in our eyes like unguarded lanterns. My father began by acknowledging the specific moments he'd fallen short, cutting my birthday cake short, leaving early from events sending that message about Thanksgiving. And my mother choked back tears as she apologized for never realizing how much I had internalized those hurts, while Ethan offered his own remorse for seeing me as a rival instead of a partner in our shared journey. And when I spoke, I used the I statements we'd practiced. I felt invisible when I was excluded. I need to know my voice matters. I want our family to be a place where all of us can shine without eclipsing one another. Silence stretched briefly before my parents nodded, my father promising to be mindful of my presence in future gatherings, and my mother suggested a new holiday tradition rotating who chooses the menu so that each person's preferences are honored. We left that session under a sky swirled with pink and gray, the air crisp yet brimming with a fragile, exhilarating warmth. Over the next month, we began experimenting with these new rituals. Ethan and I planned a game night at our childhood home, complete with old board games he had unearthed from the attic, and Mom set the table to my taste, rustic wooden chargers and wildflower centerpieces, while Dad cooked Dad's famous chili in my signature skillet. For the first time, I sat at that table not as a reluctant guest, but as an equal contributor to our family's story, laughter flowing easily as we traded childhood memories and current ambitions. Outside of family life, my career continued to flourish. I landed a promotion to senior strategist at my agency and led a successful campaign for a local environmental nonprofit, a project that allowed me to merge my professional skills with my passion for sustainability. And at our potluck with friends, as I watched Zoe, Lena, Marcus, and new faces gather around the buffet of dishes we'd each brought, the warmth in my chest reminded me that I was never alone in finding my worth. As spring approached, I drove to my Aunt Jessica's home in Seattle for our first true reunion since I'd begun this journey. We sat on her porch swing overlooking the cherry blossoms, and I shared the story of the winter therapy sessions, the fragile apologies, the new traditions, and she beamed with pride, saying that breaking a family's cycle of dysfunction takes courage few possess, yet I had done so with grace. In that moment, I recognized how far I'd come from the girl who waited on the periphery of her family's gatherings to the woman who now helped shape them, and I felt a fierce sense of gratitude for every step of my path. The heartbreak that forced me to set boundaries, the friends who held me when I faltered, the therapist who guided me to speak my truth, and the family who ultimately chose to meet me in the open. Looking ahead, I know challenges will arise. Old patterns may tempt us to slip back into familiar roles, and life's stresses will test our resolve. But I carry with me a compass forged from clarity and self-respect. If ever I feel diminished, I will remember the warmth of chosen family dinners, the power of an honest apology, and the knowledge that real love makes space for everyone to be fully seen. And so I step forward into the days ahead, ready to honor both my voice and the voices of those I love, knowing that the bravest act of all is to keep opening my heart even when it frightens me, because true connection depends on the courage to stand in full light. I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments. Have you ever rebuilt relationships with family or friends after conflict? How did you find the strength to speak your needs? Remember to like, subscribe, and share this story with anyone who might need a reminder that they deserve to be seen as they are. Story 2. My family blocked me from the group chat during my wedding. Then I came across pictures of them on vacation in Hawaii. Caption the families that are now complete. I only sent one message. While it lasts, enjoy it. I removed my name from the family business that day. The payroll account was frozen. My dad received a call from the Internal Revenue Service a week later. He knocked on my door for 20 minutes that night. When I opened it, it wasn't just that they weren't there that surprised me. They blocked me from the family group chat at that precise moment on my wedding day. I recall waiting outside the location immediately following the ceremony. Everyone was making their way to the reception hall as the sun was lowering and the sky had a gentle golden hue. Emma was laughing with her bridesmaids about the wind catching her veil. In my pocket, my phone buzzed. When I looked, I saw that it said, "You have been removed from Smith Family Core." I had assumed it was another congratulations message. No context, no warning, simply gone. As if it were written in a foreign language, I gazed at the screen. My initial thought was that it was an error. Perhaps Caleb accidentally tapped something. Perhaps Dad was trying to change the group photo or mute notifications because he was confused. That group chat has existed for 8 years. Birthdays and holidays, news about the family business. Everything passed through it. However, when I attempted to open it, nothing. I couldn't get in. At that point, I became aware that they were absent. Their table was empty of chairs. As a result, the chairs were arranged precisely. Mark, Caleb, Mom, and Dad are all empty. The waiters were constantly checking for tardiness. Alan, my closest friend, asked if they were stuck in traffic. I simply shrugged. I did not want to spoil the night. The fact that they had RSVP'd more than once made matters worse. They had filled out the online form, texted to confirm again the previous month, and even discussed their attire. My mother went to great lengths to avoid conflict with the bridesmaids. Mark invited his girlfriend to attend. "Yes," I replied. They weren't merely anticipated. The damn plan included them. Before taking family pictures, the photographer kept asking if we wanted to wait for them. I continued to put it off. Eventually, we simply left them out. During dinner, Jody asked in a whisper if there had been any interaction between us. I told her I had no idea. That was the reality. I didn't receive a response until the 3rd day of our honeymoon. Before going to our cabin rental, we were in Napa only for a few tastings. I opened Instagram to see Emma selecting a bottle, merely by habit. Then they appeared standing on a Maui beach. They are all 4 smiling, holding cocktails, and wearing matching floral prints. Even his father, who never takes pictures, had Mark's arm around him. The caption said that the family was now complete. I merely sat there. No passion, no tantrum, simply empty. 2 asides. At first, she remained silent. Simply place her hand over mine. I informed her that I had one item to send. From her phone, I launched WhatsApp. She typed one message while still in the group. "While it lasts, enjoy it." I opened my laptop after that. Smith wrote, "My dad wasn't the only one in logistics. I had been making it a reality for the past 6 years. I was the one who got us online, even though we were co-owners. Got the job at Walmart. Half of the logistics were automated. For transactions exceeding $10,000, I would configure the dual signature protocol. He had no idea how to use it. I deleted my name from the company registration after logging in. I put my shares in a holding pattern that resulted in their freezing. I also froze the payroll account, which is crucial. Withdrawals must be approved by me. That Friday was payroll due. I stayed out of the spotlight. Did not speak up. Let the quiet do the talking. I received a call from an unidentified number a week later. Didn't respond to Dad's CPA's voicemail. The IRS had apparently noticed some disparities, missing paperwork and 2 years' worth of unpaid state taxes, and the amusing part, they couldn't have produced half of the necessary financial records without me. Before I even got to the front door that night, I heard the knocking. 20 minutes straight. I took a while to respond. I held him up. He was standing there when I opened the door, looking red-faced and sweating as if he had been in hell. And what he said first, "What did you do?" For a few seconds, I allowed the silence to linger. He anticipated that I would recoil, defend myself, or perhaps even offer an apology. I simply waited while leaning against the doorframe. He moved forward as if he were going to enter. I remained motionless. The payroll was frozen by you. Are you aware of your actions? I gave a nod. Yes, I am fully aware of my actions. He would get somewhere if he continued to talk like that. Claimed that the drivers threatened to walk. That was already in the warehouse crew's possession. Penalties for missing deadlines were demanded by 2 clients. Claimed that because my credentials were linked to the online reporting, the accountant was unable to even file. The one thing he believed would shake me was then dropped. This morning the IRS called. 5 years' worth of returns are being examined. 5. They believe we have been concealing our earnings. If this isn't fixed, we're all going to collapse. That word struck a different chord. We're all falling. I reminded him that the one guy they excluded from the family chat on his wedding day was not included in this. Apparently, that included everyone who could travel to Hawaii and pretend I didn't exist while grinning for the camera. He attempted to explain that it was simply a bad moment and that they needed space and that it wasn't personal. My wedding gave you the space you needed. That momentarily silenced him. He quickly changed to anger, claimed that I was being childish petty and discarding everything we had worked so hard to build. Then he took a folded piece of paper out of his jacket. After weighing it once, he threw it between us on the floor. I signed sheet Nindo, the same document as 3 years ago. And it was a copy. I had forgotten a clause that was hidden in the early partnership filings. Under certain circumstances, it granted him some partial authority to override financial freezes. However, those requirements necessitated evidence of carelessness or deliberate injury. He was going to accuse me of undermining the business, that I did it maliciously. Even though he was bluffing, it was enough to keep the days that followed interesting. His attorney sent a cease and desist letter by Monday. I had responded to mine by Tuesday with a thorough audit of all the financial decisions I had made since joining, including the ones I had flagged over the years, all of which I had screenshots of, and several of which had verged on tax fraud. I kept most of it from Emma. Although she was aware of the outline, I spared her the anxiety. Before my family's chaos spilt into our new life, I wanted her to have at least a few days of peace after we returned from our honeymoon. For the first time in 2 months, Mom texted on Wednesday. Could we please have a conversation? This is becoming unmanageable. No explanation, no apology. A tiny, delicate olive branch tossed like a discarded tissue. The situation changed by Thursday when the CPA began contacting me directly, even though I didn't reply. Stated quietly that the IRS was investigating more than just the company. They were investigating Caleb, a phony vendor, offshore accounts, and Dad's personal finances. The IRS wasn't merely snooping, they were hunting. And I still hadn't done a single thing. Emma and I were wrapping up our lunch when the call came in. For the first time since the wedding, we had been organizing thank you notes at the dinner table. Things seemed to be starting to calm down. My phone buzzed with an unknown number while we were making jokes about who had the worst handwriting. I took a step back and replied. Richard was the one, a CPA, the family business, and a man I had only spoken to twice in 6 years, and only when something was amiss. He wasted no time. Listen, David, you should be aware of what's going on, even though I know you're no longer involved. He spoke in a sharp click. I didn't even inquire about how he obtained my number. I simply listened. As it happens, the payroll account did more than just bounce a few paychecks when I froze it. It interrupted a mid-transfer transaction that the bank's compliance team had flagged for audit. The account belonged to a shell company that purportedly maintained fleet software. However, that vendor was non-existent. The vendor's founding documents listed the address as a mailbox store in Nevada. Caleb. At that point, everything began to make sense. Why did Caleb always participate in the business in such a casual manner? Why he never had to describe his actual actions? How bad is it? I asked Richard. After a brief silence, he stated that the IRS had now referred the matter to a criminal investigator. They examined every transaction over the previous 5 years, not just one. My father had used my digital signature on a number of documents that I hadn't even seen. And it seems that my withdrawal had revealed the chain of irregularities: fake invoices, inflated contracts, and unreported foreign income. I sat with it for a while after hanging up. I could have left at that moment, see them burn. However, I was still in charge of the backup server, which I had configured for complete financial transparency. It contained all of my emails, contract, invoices, and approvals, and nobody could access it without my password. I simply locked the system remotely. I didn't even need to remove anything. Emma asked if there was a problem when she noticed me working. I informed her that there was no point in trying to fix it at this time. I received a text from a Jody later that night. The IRS called again and said, "Your dad is in a spiral. Caleb hasn't had any sleep. Your mother is going crazy." It was not gratifying, not just yet. It seemed inevitable. Then I heard a knock at about 9 o'clock at night. Before I looked, I knew it was him. Dad was standing there. The same outfit as last week. His hair was unkempt, as if he had spent the entire day rubbing it through. I didn't have to invite him inside before he accepted. A thick envelope was just thrust into my chest. "Go through it. In all of this, you are not innocent. Right here." I remained at the door and slowly opened it. There were printed emails with excerpts of correspondence from 2 years ago between me and a logistics client. I recall that transaction, though, because my name was on the approval line of a big shipment contract. A standard delivery quote was approved by me. He was the one who later changed the invoice to conceal excess money and inflate the delivery cost. "If the IRS sees those emails out of context, they won't just come after me," he said, leaning in. "They will also pursue me." He believed that I would drop everything because I would be afraid. Unfreeze the accounts, log back in, and assist them in cleaning up the mess. Not even blinking. "I wish you luck in that endeavor." I said, "You changed those figures." "Not me." His voice changed. After attempting to persuade me, he said that we could clean it up together if I returned right away. Claimed that they erred by skipping the wedding, and that it is still a family business. However, we can get past that. He had never even brought it up before. And he believed that was sufficient. All of this would be resolved if he made a passing reference to leaving me on the most significant day of my life. I simply gave a headshake. "That bridge was destroyed by you. You're angry now. The fire is getting bigger." He remained motionless for an additional moment, as if he had something more to say. He turned and proceeded down the driveway after that. I locked the door after closing it. Not to be safe, to illustrate a point. Our former legal counsel sent me an email the following morning. It seems that my dad was attempting to raise liquid cash by selling company shares to a third party in a panic sale, but he was unsuccessful. Every significant asset still had my name attached to it, and the investigation was now as well. I anticipated repercussions, irate texts, threats, and perhaps even a last-ditch voicemail from my mother attempting to mend things. Hearing from someone I hadn't spoken to in more than 10 years was unexpected. I received an email on Friday morning from someone I hadn't seen since high school. My dad's estranged younger brother is Uncle Grant. When I was still in college, he had been forced out of the company. I was always told that he caused issues with the board and mismanaged funds. He sent a brief email. I heard what was going on. I waited for someone to notice it at last. "Meet me if you want the full picture. Everything is mine." At first, I didn't respond. I had no idea how to interpret it. Emma insisted that I go, stated that perhaps knowing what I was truly up against would be helpful at the very least. So I went to a diner 2 towns over and met him. He didn't appear resentful, but he did look older than I remembered, simply exhausted. Before our coffee had even arrived, he slid a manila folder across the table. Copies of old bank transfers emails, and one document in particular that made my stomach turn were all inside. It had to do with agreement, day-to-day 8 years ago with Uncle Grant's and my dad's signature. The rationale behind the acquisition: not poor management, silence, not failure. Uncle Grant had reportedly learnt that Dad and Caleb had been using surplus warehouse lease income to fund a side venture, a private shell company operating under Mom's name that purchased and sold commercial trucks at exorbitant prices, primarily to our own business. The scam was full circle, draining the company's resources while enriching themselves. Grant would disappear and never talk about it again after learning that it offered him a payout on one condition: He kept the documents in case something went wrong, but he accepted the deal. Now that the walls were closing in and the IRS was circling, he thought it was time for someone else to find out. I took it all, I scanned it, twice backed it up. I thanked him and walked away. The following day, I received a request from Smith and Rose's legal team to attend a mediation call immediately. They wanted to get everything settled as soon as possible, offer me a discreet buyout of all my shares in return for granting me access to the servers and locked accounts. I didn't pay attention to the message. That same afternoon, Emma came home with news of her own. While shopping downtown, she ran into one of the warehouse workers, Diego, a guy who'd been with the company since I joined. He told her something strange. Apparently, my dad had told the employees that I was the reason no one was getting paid, that I'd sabotaged the system. After a fight with my brothers, he was trying to turn them against me, said I was bitter and unstable. I didn't even get mad. I just laughed because by Sunday something happened that none of them expected. The IRS didn't just freeze the business accounts, they froze the personal ones too. My dad's, my mom's, and Caleb's, all pending formal investigation. No access, no transfers, no warnings. Emma and I were having dinner when I got the alert. All three of them were on a list of financial holds issued as part of the wider fraud probe. They were locked out of their money. Everything. I set my foot down, leaned back, and smiled. The house of cards wasn't just falling now. It had collapsed. Monday morning, I woke up to 33 missed calls, 9 from that 10 from Mom. The rest split between Mark and Caleb. Not a single voicemail, just silent panic. By noon, I had received 2 emails from the IRS requesting copies of the backup financial records, specifically the archived correspondence contracts and vendor activity that only I could access. I didn't respond yet. I wanted them to sweat. That evening, I got an unexpected knock. Emma checked the people first. It was my mother. I hadn't seen her since Christmas 2 years ago. She always preferred to play the quiet partner in family disasters, passive smiling, never directly responsible. But this time, she was the one standing on our doorstep, gripping her purse like it was the last stable thing in her life. She asked to come in. Emma left the room. We sat in silence for a few seconds, and then she launched into a rehearsed apology. She said she didn't know the full story, that she never agreed to skip the wedding, that Dad had convinced her it would be less tense if they just went away for the weekend. She insisted she tried to call. I told her she could have tried harder, told her I'd seen the group photo, the one with the caption about the family finally being whole. She shifted gears fast, said they were in trouble, that the IRS freeze meant they couldn't pay their mortgage, their credit cards, even their groceries. She said Dad was falling apart, that Caleb had a breakdown, and that the company would be destroyed if I didn't help with everything we had built over the years. She then said something that chilled me to the bone. We are aware that there is an emergency fund. I went cold. Emma and I had arranged for that years ago. A different investment account that is in my name, bound by a trust, not even in the company's operations. We did not record it. Few people were aware of its existence. How I inquired. She paused. It's possible that your father took some bank records from when you two had joint authority. He believes that funds ought to be reinvested in the company. Without the company, you would not have had it. She spoke as though it made sense, as if she thought it was true. I got to my feet. I don't give a damn about his opinion. We own that money. On my wedding day, you all abandoned me. I owe you nothing, she pleaded, said the words literally. Please. She then made one final attempt at a card. Your dad is going to go public if you don't help. Let's say you planned this and manipulated the books, I chuckled. She winced. They wanted to drag me down with them as they were cornered and drowning. I assured her that I had no plans to halt the inquiry, that I was only holding off on sending the IRS the entire archive because I wanted to see how far they would go. After a moment of stunned silence, she walked away without saying anything more. I turned in all of the emails, backup files, transaction logs, and Uncle Grant's paperwork the following morning. After shutting down the laptop, I took Emma to brunch. Allow them to burn. The investigation officially began 3 days after I sent the archive to the IRS. I was informed that it made the news by Emma. Due to years of tax evasion, a family-owned goods company is currently under federal audit. No names were given, but anyone in the area who knew the Smiths could figure it out. Friends began sending each other texts. Some of my former coworkers contacted me, some in disbelief, some simply to say they always sensed something wasn't right. My father sent me the last message I had ever read that evening. It was a screen grab of a court document written by his lawyer, in which he accused me of violating a fiduciary duty, causing harm to the business, and putting the whole family under financial and emotional strain. He threatened to file a civil lawsuit if I didn't remove the documents. The number was blocked by me, without hesitation. I then deleted my name email profile and everything else after logging into the company portal, which was one of the few things that was still operational. Not in retaliation, not with malice, merely because the moment had come. A few hours later, Mark attempted to call. This time he left a voicemail, claimed that I had overreached, claimed that I ought to have dealt with this within the family. I misunderstood the situation, and we could have had a conversation according to a paragraph that Caleb sent me via email. It's funny. On my wedding day, nobody wanted to talk. All of them failed to appear, not a single message. However, they discovered their voices when their house was being audited, and their accounts were frozen. I didn't respond. They all made decisions. I broke off all communication. I wasn't spiteful when I blocked them. I simply didn't want their poison to continue seeping into the things Emma and I had created. 3 months later, we relocated out of state. The town is clean now. The emergency fund was left unaltered. I resumed private consultations. Emma returned to her teaching. Jody and a few other family members kept in touch, and our life became calm, steady, and genuine. When we got together for dinner, some of our wedding friends would still bring it up. How my family did something that no one could believe. How foolish it was to put a vacation ahead of the wedding of their own son. They only care about control, and when they lose it, they lose everything according to the consensus of all. It has now been almost a year. I still occasionally receive unsolicited letters from law firms or distant cousins who are trying to catch up. I disregard them. I have a new rhythm and a new home with Emma. Now we discuss children. We take trips when we feel like it. I never imagined that we would laugh as much as we do. I have lost my anger, just finished. I occasionally tell the truth when someone asks if I miss them. I miss the person I believed them to be. However, that version never appeared, not when it was important, and I won't now either. 6 days after I had assumed that everything was behind me, I received an email that completely stopped me cold. It wasn't a notice. It was from the IRS, not a request. I'm grateful. In a formal statement, one of the case's senior agents acknowledged the importance of the information I supplied. I didn't anticipate it. It stated that several offshore accounts connected to fraudulent vendor payments, not just in my dad's name, had been found as a result of the backup records I submitted. Other colleagues were present, a few of whose names I knew from previous business gatherings. The email ended with something unexpected, even though 2 of them had already left the country. Based on the records, we will be sending out a subpoena for testimony. Although we think you were not aware of these activities, your cooperation could help us develop the case more broadly. That line caught my attention twice. My dad was no longer the only focus of this. This was larger. Emma discovered something in the mail later that afternoon. A heavy envelope. It was delivered by hand, but there was no return address. No label, no stamp. There were 2 items inside, a flash drive and a letter from Caleb. His letter was apologetic rambling and at times desperate. He claimed that Dad had lost his mind, that he was attempting to place the blame on anyone he could, and that he had coerced Caleb into creating the phony vendor accounts, about which Mom knew more than she admitted, but kept quiet out of fear of losing everything. He apologized for what transpired at the wedding and stated that he didn't want to go down with them. He was aware that I would never forgive him. However, I might eventually come to understand if the flash drive helped to balance things out. I connected it to a disposable laptop. It contained spreadsheets, voice memos, internal emails, and even a few videos. In one of them, the father was laughing while speaking with someone in another country about how the child signs everything I put in front of him. I was that person. Another showed him describing to Caleb how to avoid banking thresholds by dividing vendor payments into smaller batches. It was sealed. I sent a brief message with all of this information to the IRS contact. Another present. Emma and I sat on the porch that evening. We said very little, just observed the rolling breeze and the darkening sky. And I came to a realization. This was no longer retaliation. It was taking something away. A last cleaning out of everything that attempted to ruin what ought to have been my greatest day ever. Into a betrayed memory. It was just over now, and for good this time.